Joining us today from London is Ratun Lahiri, Senior Advisor, Unicorn India Ventures. Ratun, thank you very much for joining us on Republic.
My pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Ratun, we were talking earlier today and we were talking about Donald Trump's latest comments today morning when he said that he wants to open up India. I just want to understand from you, as someone who understands the economic and the financial sides of geopolitical, so to say, better. I want to understand from you, what's your first thought when you hear someone saying that he wants to open up India?
Well, firstly, I'm glad that this, that we are seriously talking about this trade deal, after, a couple of weeks of quiet. But opening up, I was quite struck by the words used, because a trade deal is a partnership, between two countries. And to say that one country is actually opening up another country, is I would say, a rather unfortunate choice of words. I would I was very heartened by the way the free trade agreement between the UK and India was described, by Prime Minister Keir Starmer of the UK. And I would have expected words more to that effect.
Right. Ratun, I mean, you mentioned UK-India free trade agreement. The language used by the UK Prime Minister was more of two equals probably, arriving at an agreement. Whereas Donald Trump, do you think he's trying to patronize India in any way? Or global community in any way?
I felt so. It was a very brief soundbite from President Trump, but it seemed as if, it was... one party dictating terms to another.
Okay.
Almost, you're right. It seemed a bit condescending to me and patronizing. As a proud Indian citizen, it seems very patronizing to me. And I'm sure, this is not lost on on others too. Many others would have felt like this.
Okay. India has historically, however, always countered things with action. I mean, even if we look in the global order right now, the way Indian economy has risen over the past few years, it's phenomenal. Would you like to give us an insight into how, in real sense, actually, India versus America, how India fares better in terms of probably its global stature, probably when it comes to the economic standpoint, so to say?
Well, certainly, I deeply admire the U.S. There's no question about, about the fact, given, everything put aside, the innovation, their audacity of ambition, their ability to get things done, the U.S. is an engine of growth in and of itself, and I spend about in excess of 5 months of the year in the US now. And, every section of the US, is a hub of innovation and activity.
Right.
Pretty much like India, actually. Therefore, as I talk about, as we've gone about raising our third Unicorn India Ventures Fund 3, this $150 million fund, I've had the chance, the opportunity, to look at the US very closely. Okay. And I see in the number of ways in which it mirrors the US, mirrors India, in terms of that. But, there is no doubt about the fact that the US is an engine of growth unparalleled, unsurpassed. But having said that, nobody can exist in isolation. No country can exist in isolation, and nobody can exist in isolation. The world is, we get along in terms of partnership. And the way India is growing, at the moment, the fourth largest economy, they're saying that much ahead of 2030, India will become the world's third largest economy. And more than that, India's own home market, the growing middle class, etc. This is not something that any major economy, however rich and powerful it may be, can choose to ignore, can afford to ignore.
Okay. Ratun, sitting in Delhi or sitting in India, we keep thinking India is really rising on global stage. I want to understand from you, as an Indian sitting in London, what is the view from there? What is the view of an Indian sitting in London looking at India? What does it look like?
I mean, India, there's no doubt, that that this century, as many people have said, this century belongs to India. I mean, no wonder, as Bob Sternfeld, of McKinsey had said that the 25th, the century belongs to India. And I think it's true. He's not the only one. Right from every, global political leader, business leader, has acknowledged what India brings to the table. But having said that, we shouldn't also get ahead of ourselves. India also has many issues. We are getting there. We have not yet arrived. We are on the path, and there is no doubt that the future is extremely bright. And I think the brightest thing is our people, in terms of what we are doing. I mean, look, let me give you one example. In terms of today, even if you look over the last 10 years, when we started the Make in India campaign, the Prime Minister Modi started Make in India, we sat back and thought, all right, manufacturing will come to India. Today, deep tech is a very, very important path, of part of growth, to the extent that what we are seeing is, even in our fund, three of our companies, this fund we are investing primarily in deep tech. And let me just take examples and give you. There's a company called XSure that we have invested in, in the biotechnology area. I mean, basically, they're using they're in the oncology treatment area, targeted oncology treatment, using exosomes, for pathological use. And this is barely 2.5, 3 months in the making. The company was incorporated. They've just come back after spending a year in Japan. And we've just announced investment. I was talking to the founders and I said, how did you go to Japan? Did you apply for a grant? They said they were actually, requested by the Okinawa Institute of Technology, to apply. They were flown to Japan. 400 companies that had applied. This company was selected out of, they selected 4 companies. XSure was one of the 4 selected. And me thinks that, they had already made up their minds to, get XSure, on their platform. Incubated them for a year, introduced them, to the biggest of Japanese banks, asked them to set up a subsidiary in Japan. The world is waking up to the talent, the sheer talent that India brings. There's another company called Bonvi, we've invested in. Draper, the American venture capitalist, he needs no introduction. Right. He came over, for a meeting to Bhubaneswar, signed the check and went back, and we've come in along with, Draper, with Tim Draper, on this investment. So people sitting outside, are seeing what is happening in India, and India cannot be ignored. So it is not deep tech, engineering talent going forward, manufacturing. This is going to be really something going forward. Okay. So yes, we are not there, but certainly the future looks very bright. In fact, even the UK government, when I was reading the text of the free trade agreement, they've said that by 2031, manufacturing will account for 21% of India's GDP. Right. And they're saying that, and they're saying that India with its, quality products, at low cost, the impact it can have on the world is not lost on anybody.
Okay. Ratun, but then my question to you is that if India is so promising, why in that case are Indians so fascinated by the West, and why is it that we are seeing so many professionals, the kind of brain drain that we've seen over the past about 2 decades? How do you justify that, or do you think it's reversing in any way?
It's actually, Pranav, I think what is happening now is we are actually seeing a reverse brain drain happening. Okay. Let me give you an example of and again, I speak from, with live examples. There's a company called Netrasamy, that we've invested in, in the semiconductor space. This is, 2 very bright engineers, of my vintage, who spent, years working in the US, in marquee US companies, Intel, Qualcomm, etc. Now in their 50s, they have chosen to come back to India, and start this company, out of Kerala. Okay. And this is their second innings, and they're not alone. There's so many others who are coming back. There's a company called Orbitate, that we have invested in. Okay. We were meeting the team about, before we announced investment, I was in Bangalore meeting the team about 5 months ago, and they were introducing the team, and I realized that almost 60 or 70% of the engineers have come back from the Japanese Space Agency, from NASA, from the European Space Agency, young engineers. And I actually asked them, I said, you've chosen to come back. Why? They said, because we want to be part of India's growth engine. We want to be part of Viksit Bharat 2047. And we want to contribute to this.
Okay.
So there's actually a reverse brain drain happening, very much so.
Okay.
It's a slow trickle now, but it will become a flood going forward.
Okay. As a global investor, if I have to ask you, compare between America and India, would you give me 5 points comparison or a 3-point comparison between two countries? What weighs for which country?
As a global investor?
Yes.
It depends on the sector that one is investing in, Pranav, in terms of that.
Okay. In terms of pure economies?
I beg your pardon?
In terms of pure economies, I mean, which economy is, if we have to just compare economies to economies, what are the things that are working for the US and what are those things that work for India? I mean, comparison between the US economy and Indian economy.
Look, the US economy is unparalleled, in size, scale, and shape.
Right.
That's one thing. And, hub of innovation, certainly so. If you just look at the companies that come out of the US, certainly so. But what I'm saying, and India is very nascent compared to that. But having said that, I'm heartened by what I'm seeing, in terms of that. And going forward, I think this will, as I said, this is just the beginning. And things will happen. As I've said, giving you examples of Orbitate or Netrasamy or Xshore or some of the other companies that I've just mentioned, just from our fund, and there are so many other funds, the very fact that, Japanese or American investors or British investors are choosing to invest in deep tech in India shows you, where India is headed.
Okay. Can I ask you some of the shortcomings of living abroad? You've been staying abroad for a long, long time. What are some of the shortcomings of staying abroad at a time when India's story is shining?
Yeah, I think some of the sheen. So let me tell you this. Earlier, the American dream was the only dream available. Was the only dream in the world.
Right.
You went to America and you lived the American dream. And you founded companies, you did startups. You had a good job, you had a safe, secure, Western liberal democracy. You had freedom. You had everything else. I think now what has happened is, there's very much an Indian dream that is also in the making. And we can see it. And which is why, that is part of the reason why Indians are saying that, why should we go to a foreign country, to live there, to work. Of course, the visa-related issues, etc., are very much there.
Right.
The H-1B issues and the American economy and things like that. But my point is, that many youngsters are now saying that why should we do this? Uproot ourselves to go to an alien, country, when we can actually pursue an Indian dream, very much an Indian dream in India, where you can do the same things that you're doing in the US,
Right.
you can do in India, surrounded by family, surrounded by, by everything that is familiar, and surrounded by our deep culture, heritage, and everything else that is, that we value so very much.
Okay. What are those things that you miss personally?
I spend a lot of time in India, in terms of that. So I think, so let me tell you this, about 4 weeks back, we were in Palo Alto and in California, and I was sitting across the table with one of our founders, a very bright young, gentleman in his late 20s, early 30s.
Okay.
And the company is doing well. They have a very large and growing presence in the US. And we were trying to convince him over dinner, to shift base to the US. There are two co-founders,
Right.
for at least one of them to shift base to the US.
Right.
And after much humming and hawing, I think he practically said that he didn't want to do that. He was willing to come every quarter. He was willing to recruit in the US and make sure that the team worked, etc. But he didn't want to come because he said, I do not wish to give up the comfort, the security, and what I get in India, by uprooting my young family. He's got a very young family,
Okay.
And live in the US now. It doesn't have any any meaning for me, in terms of that. And I couldn't help but think, back to the days when we graduated from college, and, I mean, getting a master's degree and, then going in for a PhD perhaps or whatever, just immigrating to the US or, somewhere, UK, Australia was just a dream for everybody. At the moment, what I see is, they're going now, to the US, to the West, but then coming back.
One question to bring you back to where we started, Donald Trump patronizing India. Is there any way India's actions will be in a position to give a befitting answer to the US president's, so to say, the attempts to patronize?
I think it's like this. I think, like India, the US is a vibrant democracy. And, governments change. Presidents are not, are not there for, the governments will change, presidents will change. And I think we just have to wait and see how it goes. I do not think, that we need to rush into a deal that is not good for India, at all. I don't think that is something. I'm very certain that our government of India and Prime Minister Modi will not allow that. I'm more than confident in that. And I think, I think we should just, we are confident enough to wait and see how it pans out in the long term.
Okay, and do you see?
That's my view. And the other thing is, India is too strong a country. India will never be, an addendum, to the US. It never is. Even in the days when India was, was much weaker and poorer, even then we had the non-aligned movement because we did not want to be seen, to be cowed down to any power.
True.
And now India, the fourth largest economy in the world and being who we are, I don't think, we will ever cow down. I don't think we should.
Do you see a day
and I think we should stand our ground, and see where it goes.
Do you see a day when India will be the largest economy in the world, overtaking the US?
Why not? Why not? I think the best thing going for us is our people. We say 1.4 billion people and, young population, etc. It's, and if you don't get them jobs, then, that in and of itself can lead to a lot of, can lead to certain turmoil within the country. People worry about that. And every economy worries about that. The UK worries, the US worries, how to keep young people employed. But I think our youth are our biggest, are a great asset to us, are our biggest asset. With the median age of 28, the positivity, the optimism that people have, and I think that is what fuels growth. And with that, also, what is happening is the access to education, that and the access to equal opportunity, that government policies have been creating over the last decade. This is a very new India.
True. Wonderful. Ratun, thank you very much for joining us. We'll keep coming back to you for more insights on your views on economy and matters like this. Thank you very much. Thanks.